Peggy Frank did not expect to see that man again. Ryu Tai-sung did not expect to see that woman again. Yet there they were, standing in the middle of the same street, staring at each other like two people who had spent the whole night trying to forget the same mistake. And then, at the exact same moment, the exact same words exploded out of both of them. "Are you stalking me? I know I messed up the other night, but that doesn't mean you should be following me around. I don't know you, you don't know me, and that is exactly how I want to keep it." The pointing fingers, the wide eyes, the full-bodied outrage directed at the other person's face. Silence swallowed the street whole. They had both said every single word, together, at the same time. 12 hours earlier, they had been strangers at a bar, a fallen prince with his empire in ashes, a queen with 4 months left on a ticking clock. They drank, they laughed, they mocked each other's disasters like two people with absolutely nothing left to lose. Neither of them knew that terrible night was the beginning of everything. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on your notifications, because this story is only getting started. But to understand how two strangers ended up on that street, screaming the same words into each other's faces at the exact same time, we need to go back further. We need to go back to the moment Ryu Tai-sung's entire world quietly fell apart in a bathroom he paid rent for. It was a Friday. He remembered it was a Friday because Yuna always came home late on Fridays. He had stopped asking why a long time ago. He had learned to warm his own dinner, sit at a table built for two, eat alone, and tell himself that a busy woman was just a successful woman. That Friday, he went into the bathroom to drop her robe on the hook behind the door. Something fell out of the robe pocket and hit the tiles. He picked it up. He stared at it. 2 lines. Ryu Tai-sung stood in that bathroom for a very long time. Then the longest, most embarrassing smile broke across his face. He laughed, quietly at first, then out loud, the kind of laugh that escapes a man when relief finally catches up to 3 years of tension. He pressed the test to his chest. A baby. Yuna was pregnant. Maybe this was the thing that was going to fix everything. The late nights, the silence at dinner, the cold shoulder that had become so familiar, he had started to think it was just her personality. He did not change his shirt. He grabbed his jacket and ran downstairs and flagged down a cab. Not a rideshare, an actual cab, because he wanted to feel every second of this without an app tracking it. And he gave the driver Yuna's office address with the energy of a man who was late to his own good news. Her assistant tried to stop him at the door. "Sir, she is currently I am her husband." He pushed through. The door swung open. Choi Yuna stood at the far window with her arms wrapped around a man from behind, her cheek resting against his shoulder, her eyes closed. The man had one hand settled over hers with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Not a hug searching for something, but one that had already found it long ago and had simply continued. Tai-sung stood in the doorway. His jacket was in his hand. The pregnancy test was in his pocket. The smile had stopped meaning anything. Nobody moved. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang and rang and rang, and nobody picked it up. He turned around. He did not say a word. He did not slam the door. He walked back out the same way he had come in, and the sound of his shoes on the marble floor was the loneliest sound in the world. He could not go home. Home was the apartment where every surface would be hers in a way he could not look at right now. He walked without direction, jacket over one arm, one hand in his pocket, touching the edge of a pregnancy test that had rewritten itself from miracle to question in the space of one open door. He walked until the city grew loud and bright and indifferent, and he found a bar he did not know the name of and sat at the counter and ordered something strong enough to make the numbers stop. 3 years, 1 sacrifice, a father's face across a room, a family name surrendered, an entire dynasty folded away because Yuna was worth it, because he had believed that completely. He stared at his glass. "Whatever you are drinking," said a voice beside him. "Order me 2. He looked left. She settled onto the stool beside him with the controlled precision of a woman used to walking into rooms that required her to look like she had never once in her life needed anything from anyone. She dropped her bag on the counter with the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been performing strength since morning and was now, in this dim and indifferent club, finally allowing her arms to rest. She was dressed for a night out, a structured bag, the kind of shoes that meant business, but her eyes were doing something different from the rest of her. They were doing the thing eyes do when the day has been too long and too heavy, and the face has simply run out of the energy required to keep up the pretense. Taesung looked at her for a moment. Bad day? Bad 4 months. She picked up the drink the bartender slid her way and took a sip without flinching. You? Bad 3 years. She turned and looked at him properly for the first time. You win. They sat in silence for a moment. The music was too loud for conversation but too slow for dancing, and neither of them was there to dance. What happens at the end of 4 months? He asked. She exhaled slowly through her nose. It was the exhale of someone who had explained this situation so many times inside her own head that saying it aloud had started to feel like reading from a document she had already memorized. My father passed away 8 months ago, she said. He built an empire, properties, holdings, businesses across 3 countries. He spent 40 years building it, and he spent the last year of his life arguing with his lawyer about who deserved to inherit it. She picked up her glass. He left a clause in the will. His daughter, me, must be married or must have produced an heir within 1 year of his passing. Otherwise, everything transfers to his second wife and her daughter. She finished her drink. I have 4 months left. Taesung looked at her. And you are not married. Clearly, she gestured to the bartender. And you? What brings a man to a bar counter at this hour looking like someone just removed a vital organ without informing him first? He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and placed the pregnancy test on the counter between them. She looked at it. He looked at the wall. Congratulations, she offered carefully. It is not mine. The silence that followed had texture to it. She looked at the test again. Then she looked at him. Really looked, the way you look at someone when you are recalibrating everything you assumed about them in the first 30 seconds. Then she set her glass down, turned fully toward the bartender, and said with the calm of a woman making a business decision, "We are going to need the bottle." That was how it began. They talked the way people only talk when they have nothing left to protect. She told him about Celestine, her father's second wife, a woman who had arrived in their home when Peggy was 12 with a suitcase and a daughter named Sonia, and a smile so practiced it had fooled everyone except the child who watched it every day. She told him about growing up inside her father's love but always on the edge of a household that had reorganized itself around a woman who viewed her as the primary obstacle to everything she wanted. She told him about building herself into someone who could not be dismissed, only to find that a dead man's clause in a legal document could undo 32 years of work in 4 months. Taesung told her about Yuna, how he had met her and how it had felt to love someone with that much certainty. So much certainty that when his father sat across from him and told him to choose, it had not even felt like a choice. He told her how he had stood in front of the entire family and announced that he was choosing her and watched his father's face close like a door and stay closed. And nobody, he said, turning his glass slowly in his hand, has called to check if I am still breathing. Not one person? Not one. She looked at him steadily, then she lifted her glass. To spectacular life choices. He lifted his. To spectacular life choices. They drank. Then she looked at him sideways and said with complete sincerity, "Any man who surrenders a dynasty for a woman who repays him by carrying another man's child deserves to sit exactly where he is sitting right now and think very hard about himself." He turned to look at her slowly. "I am just being honest," she said. "Any woman," he replied, "who has an entire empire waiting for her and cannot find one person willing to marry her in 32 years of living needs to seriously examine her social skills." She turned to look at him slowly. "I am just being honest," he said. She stared at him. He stared at her. Then she laughed. A real one, the kind that comes without permission, the kind that bypasses every wall and just escapes. And because hers was real, he followed. They sat at that bar counter and laughed at each other's disasters, the way only 2 people with nothing left to lose can laugh, completely and without apology. She nearly fell off the stool. He caught her elbow. They laughed until the bartender looked at them with genuine concern. They finished the bottle. They went home separately. They forgot each other the way you forget a dream by noon, deliberately and completely. And then 2 days later, Taesung turned a corner on his way to work and looked up. Peggy looked up from her phone on her way to her car. The world continued around them. Traffic moved, people passed. A hawker called out prices nobody was listening to. Neither of them moved. Then, at the exact same moment, with the exact same energy, the exact same righteous indignation rising in both their chests simultaneously, "Are you stalking me?" I know I messed up the other night, but that doesn't mean you should be following me around. I don't know you, you don't know me, and that is exactly how I want to keep it. Both fingers pointed, both chests forward, both faces wearing the full theatrical expression of people who had been deeply wronged, at the exact same time. They froze. Silence swallowed the street whole. Taesung looked at his own hand, still pointing. Peggy looked at her own hand, still pointing. They looked at each other. Then they looked violently away in opposite directions, suddenly fascinated by everything around them that was not the other person's face. He studied a building across the street with the intensity of an architect who had just discovered a critical structural flaw. She examined a lamppost with the focus of a woman who had been commissioned to write a detailed report about it, and the deadline was today. A market woman passing with a basket on her head looked at both of them, shook her head slowly, and kept walking. Taesung cleared his throat and straightened his collar. Peggy smoothed her dress and found something extremely interesting to look at on the ground to her left. "I was not following you," he said to the middle distance. "I was not following you," she said to the lamppost. "Good. Good." They walked in opposite directions without another word. That should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it. 4 days later, Peggy walked into an acquisition meeting, a mid-sized property management company her team had been in negotiations with for 3 months. She walked in with Tam Tam beside her, her executive, her right hand, the one person who had worked close enough to Peggy, long enough to read her in ways Peggy had never officially permitted, dropped her portfolio at the head of the table, and gave the room a brief, efficient scan before sitting down and opening her documents. She was not there to make friends. She was there to close terms and move on to the next thing. She did not look up when the other side's staff filed in. Ryu Taesung, sitting on the opposite end of the table as one of the company's senior accounts managers, looked directly at her and said nothing. He sat with the precise stillness of a man whose face had just encountered a situation it needed approximately 3 seconds to process before deciding that absolute professionalism was the only available response. Tam Tam, settling into her chair beside Peggy, glanced across the table, clocked Taesung, and then glanced at Peggy, who was still reading her documents. Tam Tam looked back at Taesung. Taesung looked at Tam Tam. She raised one eyebrow. He maintained his expression entirely. She looked back at her own papers. The meeting ran 50 minutes. Peggy spoke with precision and efficiency, moving through every term and counterproposal without hesitation. Taesung contributed his part when required and did so competently. Nobody watching would have suspected that these two people had sat at a bar counter 10 days ago and laughed until a bartender considered calling for help. When the meeting ended and people began gathering their things, Taesung stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked around the table. "Miss Frank." Peggy looked up, a beat. Just one, a moment where they stood on either side of their professional composure and acknowledged without words that this was extraordinarily awkward. "The terms your team proposed are very fair," he said. Then he paused for exactly 1 second. "I was wondering if you would allow me to take you to dinner." Tam Tam's pen stopped moving on her notepad. The two senior executives who had been mid-conversation behind them both stopped mid-conversation. Somebody across the room coughed. Peggy looked at him. She did not look at Tam Tam. She could already feel the energy radiating from that direction, and she did not need the encouragement. She reached into her card holder, placed a card on the table between them, picked up her portfolio. "Call me," she said, and walked out. Tam Tam followed her into the hallway and lasted exactly 4 steps before the laughter erupted out of her so completely that she had to stop walking and hold the wall. "Peggy, Peggy, that man just, in a meeting, Peggy." "Walk," Peggy said. "He asked you to dinner in front of his entire Tam Tam." I am walking, Tam Tam said, still laughing. "I am absolutely walking." He called that evening. They agreed on a restaurant and a time, and when the night arrived, Peggy walked in to find him already standing, not checking his phone, not scanning the room, just standing and waiting the way a man stands when waiting for someone actually matters to him. Something about that made her pause for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself and crossed the room. They sat. They ordered. The conversation found its footing the way conversations do between two people who are both more intelligent than they are comfortable and both carrying more than they are showing. Surface things first. lighter things, the small architecture of familiarity before the real things arrived. Then Tae-sung looked at her directly and told her everything. Not the version designed to make him look dignified, the whole version, the Ryu family name and what it had meant to carry it, the way his father had looked at him across the room when he made his announcement, not with anger, but with a finality that was somehow worse than anger. The apartment he and Yuna had built inside the rubble of everything he had walked away from. The Friday he had gone to hang her robe, the 2 lines, the office door opening, the man with his hand over hers. Peggy listened to all of it without moving, without interrupting, without offering him the polite facial expressions people offer when they are waiting for their turn to speak. She just listened, the full, complete kind of listening that costs something. When he finished, she asked, "Have you asked her?" "Asked her what?" "If the baby is yours." He picked up his fork, set it back down. "No." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment that stretched past comfortable into honest. "Because once I ask, I know," he said, "and once I know..." He stopped. "Then you have to decide," she said. "Then I have to decide." She leaned forward slightly, her elbows on the table, and looked at him with the directness of someone who has never seen the point of softening a truth that is going to land hard either way. Tae-sung, assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups. Ask your wife. Ask her plainly and ask her to her face, because right now you are standing in a burning house telling yourself you can smell smoke, but you are not entirely sure. Ask, no, and then take the next step from a place of knowing, not from a place of fear. He looked at her steadily. "And maybe," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "the reason you are so afraid of the answer is not only about the baby." "Then what is it about?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant, the city moved through its evening without caring about any of this. "About the fact that you gave up everything," she said. "Your name, your family, your future, all of it. And the idea that you gave all of that up for nothing, that is not just heartbreak. That is an earthquake. And I think a part of you already knows the answer to the question. And that is exactly why you have not asked it." The table was silent. Tae-sung sat with the truest sentence anyone had said to him in 3 years, sitting right there between the dinner plates. The waiter came and cleared the plates. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet that follows a conversation that has gone somewhere neither person planned. Then Peggy straightened slightly and looked at him with a different quality of attention, measured, deliberate. "I have a proposition for you," she said, "if you are interested in hearing it." He looked at her, then he picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I am married," he said. She opened her mouth. He was already standing. "Tae-sung, just hear me out. That is all I'm asking, 2 minutes." He was already walking. 2 minutes, she called after him. "You do not even have to agree." He pushed through the restaurant door without turning around, and the evening air hit him and he kept walking. Hands in his pockets, jaw set, telling himself that he was still a married man and that married men did not sit across from other women and entertain propositions, even as somewhere deep in his chest he already knew that the marriage he was protecting had stopped existing long before he walked out of that restaurant. He went home that night and every light in the apartment was already on. He sat at the dining table and waited. Yuna's key turned in the lock at 11. She came in, dropped her bag, kicked off her heels, moved toward the kitchen without looking at him the way she moved through any room he was in, as though he was furniture she had long since stopped seeing. "Yuna." She stopped. He was sitting at the table with his hands folded in front of him and every light on, and something about the stillness of him in that bright room made her turn slowly. "I want the truth," he said. His voice was quiet, not cold, not trembling, just quiet in the way of a man who has already absorbed the worst and is simply waiting for the confirmation. "Only the truth, no argument, no drama. I am not here to fight you, I just want to know." He paused. "Whose child are you carrying?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. He watched her face go through several things in the space of a few seconds. Surprise, calculation, the brief flicker of something that might have been guilt before it got swallowed by something harder. She straightened. Her chin came up. "What is this? You are investigating me now? What right do you have to... I am your husband." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. "That is my right. I do not want to fight, Yuna. I want the truth." She stared at him, and then she said it the way she said most difficult things, with a directness that had stopped being brave and become something closer to careless. My boss. The refrigerator hummed. A tap in the kitchen dripped once, twice, and then stopped. The city outside continued its indifferent noise. Taesung looked at her across the dining table they had bought together in the first year, in the apartment they had chosen together, in the life he had constructed from the wreckage of everything he had surrendered. "Where did I go wrong?" he asked. Not accusingly, with the genuine bewilderment of a man trying to locate the exact crack in the foundation before the whole structure falls. Something moved across Yuna's face. It was not guilt. It was older and more rehearsed than guilt. It was a grievance she had been nursing in the silence of their apartment for so long that it had calcified into something she believed completely. "We cannot keep living like this," she said. "This apartment, this life. You lost everything and I did not sign up for this, Taesung. I did not sign up for surviving. I signed up for living. You lost everything and we are just surviving. I cannot blame you for that, but I also cannot pretend I am okay with it." He looked at her, and something in his chest that had been held very carefully for a very long time began to come apart at its edges. Not loudly, just steadily, like stitching giving way. "All those late nights I sat here waiting for you," he said. "I cooked. You did not eat. I reached for you. You pulled away. I just did my hair today, Taesung. Do not touch me. I am tired, Taesung. I have a headache, Taesung. I had a terrible day, Taesung." He let each sentence land on its own before the next one came. "You, threw that terrible day around this apartment every night like it was my fault, slamming things, snapping at everything I said, making this house feel like a place I needed to apologize for existing in. And I stayed. I absorbed every single bit of it. I told myself it was stress, that you were overwhelmed, that the woman I chose was still in there somewhere underneath all of it." He looked at her directly. "The man behind every terrible day you brought home and unpacked on me. The man you were wrapping yourself around in that office while I sat here convinced I was the reason your life was not good enough." He paused and looked at her directly. "Your boss." Yuna was quiet. "I stood in front of my father," he said, "in front of every single person in that family, and I chose you. I pointed at you and said, 'This is the woman and nobody will tell me otherwise.'" His voice remained steady, steadier than she deserved, steadier than the moment required. "Not one person has called to check if I am still alive since that day. Not my father, not my brothers, not one cousin, not one person who watched me walk out that door." He stood from the table slowly. "And I was fine with that. I was fine with all of it, because I had you, or I believed I did." He looked at her one last time. "And this is how you pay me back?" He picked up his glass and carried it toward the bedroom. "Good night, Yuna." He closed the door without a sound. He lay in the dark for a long time and thought about a young man who had once stood in a room full of people who loved him and chosen to leave all of them for one person who it turned out had never fully chosen him back. He thought about the particular loneliness of being in a marriage and being alone in it. He thought about all the small surrenders he had made so quietly and so completely that he had started to believe they were just what love looked like. The warming of food nobody ate with him, the making of a bed nobody shared warmly, the carrying of a silence that had grown so heavy he had stopped noticing the weight. He was not angry, he was not broken. Something in the dark of that room, in the quiet of that night, settled in him like sediment reaching the bottom of still water. And for the first time in 3 years, the water was clear. He lay there for a long time, then he reached for his phone. He scrolled to the card he had saved, the one with the clean black print and the single line of contact details. He looked at it for a moment. Then he called. She picked up on the third ring. "I apologize for calling this late," he said. "It is fine," she said. "What is it?" "The proposition," he said. "I want to hear it, all of it. When are you available?" A pause, then, "Tomorrow, noon." "I will be there," he said. He ended the call and set the phone down and lay in the quiet of the apartment that no longer felt like anything he needed to hold on to. They met the next afternoon at a small place near her office. She was already there when he arrived, documents open, cup in hand, the look of a woman who had been working since before he woke up and had simply redirected her afternoon to accommodate this meeting. She looked up when he walked in. He sat down. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then she closed the document in front of her, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with the directness of someone who does not have time to wait for people to find their words. "You called late," she said. "I know. I apologize for that." "It is fine." She studied his face briefly. "You look like a man who has slept and made a decision." "Both," he said. He apologized before she could even open the menu. "I walked out on you," he said, "at the restaurant when you mentioned a proposition. That was rude of me and I'm sorry." She waved a hand. "People walk out on me. I'm used to it." The way she said it, flat and easy, the way someone says a thing they have repeated so many times it no longer stings, made him set the menu down and look at her. She was already looking at her own menu. "You shouldn't be used to that," he said. She looked up. "What would you prefer? That I cry about it every time?" He held her gaze. Then he smiled slightly and looked back at his menu. "Fair point." She waited. "The proposition you mentioned the other time," he said. "I want to hear all of it." She looked at him for a moment, measuring the way she measured, everything before she committed to it. Then she set down the menu she was holding carefully down. "Before I tell you anything, are you certain? Because the world around you right now is not simple. Your marriage is falling apart. You have just confirmed something you cannot unconfirm. You are in the middle of a life that is actively rearranging itself. Are you certain this is the moment you want to walk into something new?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I cannot control the choices of other people. I can only control mine, and I refuse to spend whatever comes after this sulking in a corner, waiting for people who never believed in me to finally turn around and see me." He held her gaze. "I would rather prove every single one of them wrong. Tell me the proposition." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, "My father's will requires that I be married or produce an heir within a year of his passing. I have 4 months left. I am not in a relationship. I am not going to fabricate one in 4 months that would be convincing enough to satisfy a team of lawyers and a stepmother who has been looking for every crack in my armor since I was 14. She folded her hands on the table. "I need a husband, for the reading of the will, for the transfer of ownership. After that, the contract ends. We go our separate ways, and you will be compensated, whatever amount you decide. Name it, and it is yours." He shook his head slowly. "I will tell you what I need when I need it. I am not naming a price at a cafe table." She almost smiled. Then she slid the folder across the table toward him. "Read it tonight. If you agree with the terms, sign it." He took the folder. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back at her. And because she had been honest with him, he decided to be honest with her. Fully, the way he had not been honest with anyone in 3 years. He told her who he was, not the man in the borrowed clothes sitting across from her right now, the other one. He told her about the Ryu name and what it commanded in rooms she had not been in yet. About the properties and the portfolios and the boardrooms he had walked into at an age when most of his friends were still learning what compound interest meant. He told her how he had left all of it on a table and walked out without looking back. About the pride and the certainty and the catastrophic faith of a young man who had confused love with invincibility. "And here I am," he said at the end, with the quiet, dry smile of someone who has sat with an irony long enough to find it genuinely funny. Something must kill a man. Peggy looked at him across the table with eyes that were measuring something she would not yet say out loud. Then she sat back. "Welcome to the circus," she said. He went home that night, sat at the dining table under every light, and read the contract from the first clause to the last. He set the pen beside it but did not pick it up. Not yet. Some part of him, the stubborn, faithful, foolish part that had survived 3 years on hope alone, was not ready. He was still sitting there when he heard Una behind him. He turned. She was holding an envelope. He already knew what it was before he opened it. He read through the divorce papers slowly, the way he read everything, completely without rushing, giving every word its due weight. Then he looked up at her. "Is this really what you want, Una? Have you thought carefully about this?" "I have thought about it," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She was expecting something. He could see it in the way she was holding herself, the slight tension around her jaw, the bracing. She was expecting the version of him that had spent 3 years absorbing and adjusting and asking what he could do differently. He signed his name and capped the pen and placed the papers back in her hands. She looked at his signature. Then she looked at his face. Something moved behind her eyes. Surprise first, then something she quickly rearranged into composure. But he had already seen it. "The house is yours," he said. "Give me 2 hours." She left the room. He sat alone at the table for a moment. Then he looked at the contract still open in front of him. He picked up the pen, and this time he signed it. He packed 1 suitcase. Not because he had nothing. He had suits in that wardrobe, shoes on that rack, a full life's worth of possessions in that apartment, but because he did not want any of it. Not one thread of anything that would carry the smell of the last 3 years into whatever came next. He called his colleague Jinho and asked if his couch was available for a few nights. Jinho said yes without asking questions, which was the particular grace of a true friend. Taesung picked up the suitcase and walked to the front door and opened it. 3 black SUVs sat at the curb below with their engines running, formation immaculate, tinted windows up, the kind of convoy that did not belong on this street or in front of this apartment or anywhere in the current chapter of his life. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the convoy. The convoy looked back at him with the silent, immovable patience of very expensive vehicles that have been sent to collect someone and intend to wait as long as it takes. He looked at his suitcase. 1 suitcase, 3 SUVs. He walked down the steps slowly and stood at the lead vehicle. The window came down. The driver looked at him. "Mr. Ryu, Miss Frank sends her regards." Taesung looked at the back seat, then at his suitcase, then at the street in the direction of Jinho's apartment. He got in. The house, Peggy Frank's house, because everything about it announced itself as hers before he had cleared the entrance, was the kind of house that had been designed not to impress visitors, but simply to function at a level visitors found impressive anyway. High ceilings, wide corridors, rooms that had purposes and were arranged around those purposes without pretension. Art on the walls that someone had chosen because they actually loved it, not because an interior designer had recommended it. Peggy was in the hallway when he arrived. She looked at the suitcase, then at him. "1 bag," he said, before she could say anything. "I can see that. I travel light. Apparently." She folded her arms. "Your room is the 3rd door on the right. Staff will show you where things are. Dinner is at—" "We are living together?" he said. She looked at him. "I read the contract," he said. "Every clause. There was no clause about living together." "There was a clause about convincing presentation of the marriage," she said. "Yes." "And you believe we can present a convincing marriage from separate addresses?" "I believe we can—" Taesung. She said his name the way someone says a word they have already decided is the last word on the subject. "Celestine has eyes in places eyes should not be. Her lawyer has been auditing my life for 8 months. If my husband lives somewhere else, we are done before we begin." She held his gaze. "We live here, together, as a married couple. That is what convincing looks like." He stood there. "3rd door on the right," she said, and turned and walked away. He looked at the corridor, then at his 1 suitcase, then at the convoy outside that had already begun to pull away, then at the staircase. He picked up the suitcase and walked to the 3rd door on the right. The room was the size of the entire apartment he had just left. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at the space and laughed quietly to himself. A short, private laugh at the sheer improbability of everything that had led to this particular room on this particular evening. Then he put his suitcase on the rack, opened it, and began putting away 1 man's worth of belongings in a wardrobe that could have accommodated 5. In the days that followed, they built the careful architecture of 2 strangers sharing a space without surrendering privacy. Mealtimes that became routine without being announced as such, a rhythm of morning and evening that assembled itself without discussion. She worked late, he worked early. They crossed paths in the kitchen and the corridor and the sitting room with the particular awareness of 2 people who are pretending not to be particularly aware of each other. Then Celestine arrived. She did not call ahead. Calling ahead was a courtesy, and Celestine did not extend courtesies to people she considered obstacles. She arrived with Sonia beside her and the practiced ease of a woman who had spent 20 years treating another person's home like a waiting room for her own future. Celestine walked into Peggy's sitting room like she owned it, because in her mind, she already did. She stood in the middle of it and looked at Taesung the way a woman looks at something she has decided is beneath her before she has even finished looking. Then she smiled, the smile that had fooled everyone except the child who had watched it every day from the age of 14. "So," she said, letting her eyes travel over him slowly, deliberately, the way you inspect something someone is trying to sell you at a price you find offensive. This is what you went out and found. Sonia stood beside her mother and tilted her head with the same cultivated smile, the copy slightly less polished than the original. I thought you said he was Korean, she said to Peggy, as though Tae-sung was a piece of furniture that could not hear. I did not know Korea produced this kind. What kind is that? Tae-sung said. The room shifted. Sonia had not expected him to speak. She looked at him properly for the first time and found, to her visible discomfort, that he was looking back at her with the calm and unhurried expression of a man who has stood in rooms far more important than this one, and has never once felt the need to explain himself in any of them. Celestine recovered first. We are simply surprised, she said smoothly, redirecting. Peggy has never shown interest in any man, and now suddenly there is a husband. She paused. A foreign one. From where exactly did you find him, and under what circumstances? Celestine. Peggy's voice did not rise. It simply arrived, the way a door closes when someone who owns the house decides the conversation is finished. What happens in my marriage is none of your business. Your marriage. Celestine repeated the word with a delicate emphasis that made it sound like something fragile she was choosing not to drop, only because she was not finished examining it. You sign a piece of paper with a stranger and call it a marriage. Your father would be very interested to see this. My father, Peggy said, is the reason you are standing in my house right now. Do not put his name in your mouth to make a point that has nothing to do with him. The sitting room went very still. Celestine looked at her. Sonia looked at Peggy. Tae-sung stood beside his wife with the still and absolute certainty of a man who knows exactly who he is and has decided that nobody in this room is owed a summary. Celestine turned her gaze back to him one final time, the inspection again, slower this time. I hope you know what you have walked into, she said, with the smile, always with the smile. I hope you know what you are up against, he said pleasantly. Sonia blinked. Celestine's smile stayed exactly where it was, but something behind it moved. When the door closed behind them, Peggy exhaled, a small, controlled sound, the kind that only escapes when the muscles have been holding something for the entire duration of a visit. You handled that well, he said. I have been handling that for 20 years. She moved toward the stairs. You did not have to say anything, she said. I know, he said, but you did. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face that she did not fully allow to land before she turned toward the stairs. Thank you, she said quietly. You have been handling that alone for 20 years, he said. You should not have to anymore. She paused on the first step, did not turn around. A moment passed, quiet and small, and carrying more weight than either of them acknowledged. Then she continued upstairs. He stood there for a moment after she had gone. Then he walked to the kitchen and made himself tea, because that was what he did when something had happened that he needed to sit quietly with. The days became weeks, and the weeks developed texture. They traveled when the contract required it. Events, functions, appearances in rooms where Peggy's inheritance would be observed and evaluated. He accompanied her with the ease of someone who had grown up in those rooms and was simply returning to them in a different capacity. She moved through them beside him with the steadiness of a woman who had never needed anyone to hold a room with her, but was privately noting what it felt like when someone did. In the evenings they worked. It started one night when he noticed the acquisition report she had left on the dining table and asked a question about one of the line items. She answered. He pointed at two more. She answered those two, and somewhere in the middle of the third answer, she turned in her chair and looked at him properly because the question he had just asked was not the question of someone making conversation. It was the question of someone who understood the architecture of what they were looking at. Where did you learn that? She asked. I grew up in it, he said. She slid the report toward him. An hour later, he had mapped 3 changes to her commercial leasing structure that her own team had not arrived at. He walked her through each one, not quickly, not showing off, just laying out the logic the way someone lays out a route they have walked many times for someone who is walking it for the first time. She listened to all of it, then she picked up her pen and started making notes. That was the beginning of the evenings, strategy conversations that started after dinner and ran past midnight. his knowledge of markets she was operating in, her understanding of structures he had been away from long enough to see with fresh eyes. They were useful to each other in the way that only happens between two people who are both genuinely excellent at what they do and have found someone capable of keeping up. One evening, 2 months in, her portfolio had returned numbers her team had never seen before. She was standing at her office window at 6 in the evening, the window she stood at every evening at 6 to reset herself after the day, and looking at the quarterly figures when she said, without turning around, "You are wasting." He looked up from the document he was reviewing at the sitting area of her office. She turned. "Everything you know, everything you are capable of. You are sitting inside my business giving me advice, and you are wasting." She said it directly and without softness, because that was how she said true things. "You should be building something of your own." He was quiet for a moment. "I would need resources." "I can fund you." "I will take it as a loan," he said. She looked at him. "We are married. Marriage is not a transaction, it is a partnership. Two people building together, supporting each other, investing in each other. That is what this is supposed to be." Something shifted in his face when she said that. He looked at her. Really looked, the way a man looks when someone has just handed him something he did not know he had been starving for. A woman telling him plainly that a husband and wife are supposed to hold each other up. He sat with those words for a moment in the quiet of the office and felt them land in a place that had been empty for a very long time. Then he said, "It is a contract." She stopped. It was just 4 words, quiet ones, but they hit her the way quiet things hit when they carry the full weight of what is true. She turned back to the window. Outside, the city continued without concern for any of this. She looked at it, and somewhere in the stillness of her face, something pulled inward, just slightly, just briefly, the way a person flinches when they have forgotten something, and a single sentence has brought it all the way back. Something moved across her face very quickly. "Fine, still alone. I'll have the terms drawn up." He looked at her back for a long moment, at the stillness of her shoulders, at the woman standing at that window carrying something she would not turn around and show him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Do not thank me," she said. "Pay me back." "I always pay back what I owe." She said nothing. She just stood there looking at the city, and he looked at her, and the office held both of them in its silence. He set up the consultancy with the precision and patience of someone who had done this before and had learned from every mistake the first time had cost him. He chose his first clients carefully. He built his team slowly. He came home in the evenings and they ate dinner and talked about both their businesses, the way two people talk when they have stopped pretending they are not interested in each other's personal lives. On one of those evenings, they were in the kitchen, the day's documents spread between them, tea on both sides. She handed him back one of his analysis sheets, and their hands were both on the paper at the same time. He did not move his hand immediately, neither did she. Then she slid the paper toward him and picked up her cup. "The risk assessment on the third property is conservative," she said. "Deliberately," he said. "I know," she said. "I am just noting it." He looked at her. She was looking at the document. The kitchen light caught the line of her jaw and the steadiness of her, and he thought, sitting there with his tea going cold, that he had not had a conversation this real with another human being in a very long time. Maybe ever. A conversation where both people were entirely themselves without the performance of being agreeable or impressive or careful. Una had never asked about his work, not once, not what he was thinking about or worried about or building toward. He had been a context for her life, not a person in it. He sat with that realization quietly, where she could not see it. They traveled, from New York once to Seoul, for a contact of his that had held. She walked through his city with genuine curiosity, asking about the architecture, the food, what a neighborhood had been like when he was young, what had changed. She listened to every answer with the same quality of attention. She gave everything that mattered to her. He watched her move through his streets, and something settled in his chest slowly, like something fragile finding its ground. The 4 investors happened over 6 months of careful, persistent work. 6 months that existed in part because Celestine had done what Celestine did best. She had instructed her lawyers to file a procedural challenge against the will reading, citing documentation irregularities that her legal team had spent considerable money manufacturing. It had bought her time. What she had not calculated was that the time she bought for herself was the same time Taesung used to build something she could not touch. When the fourth investor signed, Taesung walked out of that hotel lobby with the specific satisfaction of a man who has built something real with his own hands from the ground up. He turned the corner to flag down a car and walked directly into Choi Yuna. She looked at him. The suit, his own now. The way he stood, different from the man she had handed divorce papers to, different from the man who had eaten alone at a table built for two and absorbed her silences like furniture absorbs sound. "Taesung," she said. He looked at her, at the pregnancy she was now visibly carrying, heavy and almost due, at the face of a woman who had spent the months since the divorce arriving at an understanding she had not expected. Her eyes traveled over him again, over the suit, the posture, the complete absence of the particular diminishment she had grown accustomed to seeing in him. She had expected to find the version of him she had left, the quiet, absorbing, shrinking version. What was standing in front of her was something else entirely, and it was making her uncomfortable in a way she needed to immediately redirect. "So this is what you have become," she said. The words came out sharper than she intended because the alternative was admitting what she was actually feeling looking at him. A man living off a woman, being funded and housed and carried while she does the real work. She tilted her chin. "I never thought you were capable of something like this. Where is your dignity, Taesung?" He looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with hurt, just with the calm of a man who has already had this conversation with himself and settled it. "It is better this way," he said, "better than deceiving myself." He straightened his jacket. "Take care of yourself, Yuna." He walked away. She stood in the street and watched him leave. And this time, watching him leave, she felt something she had not felt the first time, which was the particular grief of understanding your own mistake too late and too completely. That evening, he told Peggy about the encounter while she was in the kitchen reviewing a document and he was making tea while also warming soup. She listened without looking up. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Are you okay?" He thought about it honestly. He gave the question the real consideration it deserved instead of the automatic answer. "Yes," he said. "Actually, yes." She turned a page. He set a cup of tea beside her without being asked. She picked it up without looking at it and continued reading. He stood there for a moment. He thought about the dinner table he used to eat at alone. He thought about the sound of keys in a lock at 11 and heels dropped and a woman who moved through rooms like he was part of the furniture. He thought about the particular loneliness of being loved conditionally and spending years too proud to name it. He turned back to the stove and checked his soup. He was smiling at the pot. He had the good sense not to let her see it. The four investors called for a celebration that nobody had formally organized, but that happened anyway because Peggy found out, through Tam Tam most likely, who had a gift for finding out things before they had officially occurred. And when Taesung came home that evening, there was a bottle of something very good on the dining table, and she was in the kitchen, and when she turned and saw him standing in the doorway, the smile that crossed her face was the most unguarded thing she had ever let him see. Not the composed public version, not the Peggy Frank who walked into boardrooms and changed them. The other one, the one who lived underneath all of that and came out only in the kitchen at the end of the day. "4," she said. "4," he confirmed. She crossed the kitchen with her arms already open, and it happened the way real things happen, without announcement, without the brain's permission, without any of the careful deliberateness they had both been practicing for months. Her hands found his face, and her lips found his, and for one whole beat the kitchen was simply a kitchen, and they were simply two people, and everything that had been building unnamed between them was suddenly, completely, undeniably named. Then she pulled back as though she had touched a flame. She stepped away. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. It was just the excitement. I got completely carried away, and it will absolutely not. Peggy. Happen again. I want to be clear that I understand the contract and I respect the terms, and that was purely a... Peggy. She stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. The bottle was on the table. The kitchen light was on. Outside, the city was doing what the city does. "Congratulations," she said finally, in a voice that had regained roughly 70% of its composure, and she turned back to the counter. He sat down at the table. He was looking at the tablecloth with an expression he was not showing her, because the expression on his face in that moment, if she had turned around and seen it, would have answered every question neither of them had yet found the courage to ask. Now, If you have been watching this far and you have not subscribed yet, do it right now and turn on your notifications, because everything is about to change. The will reading was on a Thursday. The boardroom held 2 lawyers, a notary, Peggy's full legal team, and across the table, Celestine, Sonia, and a lawyer they had hired who had been trying to find procedural grounds for a challenge for months and had found nothing because Frank Jumbo had been a meticulous man who had loved his daughter and had had the foresight to build a document that said so in every legal language available. Celestine was dressed for an occasion. She sat with the posture of a woman who had decided the outcome before arriving and had dressed accordingly. Sonia sat beside her and mirrored her composure with the dedication of a woman who had spent her whole life practicing to be her mother. Peggy sat at the opposite end in a charcoal dress that communicated nothing except that she was the person at the head of the table. Tae-sung sat beside her. The lawyer began to read. The empire, every property, every holding, every business entity that Franklin Ose had assembled across 40 years in 3 countries, transferred fully and completely and without condition to Peggy Frank. The will was precise. The language was unambiguous. There was nothing to challenge and nowhere for a challenge to gain purchase. Celestine's expression did not collapse. People like Celestine do not collapse in public. What happened was subtler, a calcification, a going still. The smile that had fooled everyone except the child who watched it every day simply stopped moving. Sonia stared at the document. They received their portions, substantial portions, because Franklin Ose had not been an unkind man even toward the people who had married him for his money. But greed does not do arithmetic. Greed does comparison. And in the comparison, measured against everything they had wanted, what they received felt like nothing. When it was over, Peggy gathered her documents, thanked the lawyers, shook hands, and walked out. In the car she did not speak. Tae-sung sat beside her and watched the city move past the window and did not speak either. He understood that this was not a moment for words. This was a moment that belonged entirely to her, to the daughter who had spent 8 months fighting to honor what her father had spent 40 years building. He sat with her in the silence of it and let it be hers. After a long while, she said quietly, "He knew exactly what he was doing." "Yes," Tae-sung said. She nodded once, and that was all. That night they sat together longer than usual. The relief of the day had softened something in both of them. They talked, they laughed quietly, and at some point the talking simply stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. And before either of them could find a reason to be sensible about it, he kissed her. Slowly, the way a man kisses a woman when he has been holding it back for a very long time. She did not pull away. She kissed him back. He pulled back just enough to look at her one more time, then he lifted her and carried her upstairs. What happened after that belonged only to them. When the morning came, Tae-sung sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands and the gray light of early morning coming in under the curtain and the specific weight of a man who was trying to do the right thing, pressing against his chest from the inside. She was already awake. He could tell by the quality of her stillness. "I am sorry," he said. "I took advantage of the moment. That was not fair to you and it will not happen again." The room went completely silent. He waited. She said nothing. The silence stretched. He turned. She was lying still, looking at the ceiling, with the particular composure of a woman who has decided that if she holds herself still enough, the moment will simply pass. He watched her face. "Peggy." "Nothing." "Why are you not saying anything?" She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were steady and unreadable in the way they went unreadable when she was carrying something too carefully to put down. "What do you want me to say, Tae-sung?" He opened his mouth. She got up before he found the answer. She walked to the bathroom. The lock turned, and behind that door, Peggy Frank sat down on the cold floor tiles and put her back against the wall and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet, private kind that only comes when a person finally confesses to themselves what they have been refusing to know for months. She was in love with him. That was the first thing, the thing underneath everything else. She had fallen in love with Ryu Tae-sung somewhere between the dining table strategy sessions and the morning tea, and the way he had stood beside her in every room Celestine had walked into without making it about himself, and she had not noticed it happening, and now it was completely, irreversibly done. And then he had woken up and immediately called it a mistake. That was the second thing, the one that had drawn the sound out of her before she could contain it. She had handed him the most unguarded version of herself, and he had opened his eyes and apologized for receiving it. She pressed her palm flat against the tiles. She was furious at herself. She was Peggy Frank. She ran empires. She had faced Celestine across boardrooms and lawyers across tables and boardrooms, full of men who had decided before she walked in that she was not enough. And she had not once, cried on a bathroom floor over any of it. And here she was, on the floor, because of a man who had arrived in her life as a business arrangement and had somehow dismantled every wall she had ever built around the part of herself she had decided nobody was worth trusting with. On the other side of the door, Tae-sung sat on the edge of the bed in the gray morning light and did not move. He listened to the silence from behind the bathroom door and understood that the silence was not absence. The silence was the sound of a person holding something very carefully in a very small space. He sat with his hands clasped between his knees and stared at the floor and thought about the specific terror of falling in love with someone after you have already been catastrophically wrong about love once before. Because Yuna had been certain too, in the beginning. He had been certain about her the way you are certain about things you have not yet tested against reality. And then reality had tested it, and he had been left sitting in the wreckage wondering what, exactly, the certainty had been about. But this was not the same thing. He knew it was not the same thing because what he felt for Peggy had not arrived in a rush of certainty. It had arrived the way real things arrive, slowly through accumulated evidence, through a woman who told him hard truths at a dinner table because she respected him enough not to soften them, through a woman who had loaned him money with no terms because she believed he would repay it, through a woman who had sat beside him in a car after the hardest day of her year and not asked him to perform comfort she did not need, through a woman who picked up the tea he placed beside her without looking at it and drank it because she trusted that it was right. He had watched her carry everything, the inheritance, the stepmother, the board, the grief of a father gone, the loneliness of a woman who has been in charge of herself for so long she has forgotten what it feels like to be held. And he had watched her carry all of it with a steadiness that had nothing to do with not feeling it and everything to do with being the kind of person who does not put her weight on others because no one has ever made her believe it would be safe to. He thought about Yuna's voice. Where is your dignity? Kept man. He thought about the months in this house in her world surrounded by everything that belonged to her and not to him. And he thought about whether, when Peggy looked at him, she saw what Yuna had seen. A man living on someone else's life, waiting to be rescued. And that fear, not of loving her, but of being wrong about whether she loved him back and whether she saw him clearly or just as a useful arrangement that had run its course. That fear was what had kept him silent every time the moment had arrived. He could not be wrong again. He did not think he could survive being wrong again. He got up. He made tea. He left a cup outside the bathroom door without knocking. Then he went downstairs. 2 months passed. His business stood on its own legs now. Real legs, built from real work and real decisions, and 4 investors who had come in because of his reputation and stayed because of his results. He had an office with a window and a team of 6 and a pipeline that was building steadily in the direction of something that would last. He transferred the full loan repayment on a Wednesday morning, every cent with an interest rate she had not requested, but that he had calculated and applied anyway because he always paid back what he owed. He called her. Accounting notified me, she said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I do not want the compensation either. Whatever was agreed in the contract, I do not want it. Tae-sung, you have done enough, he said. More than enough, more than anyone has ever done. He paused. More than I knew how to expect. A silence opened between them on the line, not empty, the way silences are not empty when both people on either side of them are holding something they are not yet ready to say. Then his phone lit up with another call. He looked at the screen. Ryu Jung-hyun. He stared at it for a moment. Peggy, he said, I have another call coming in. Can I call you back? Go, she said. He switched the line. Tae-sung. Father. His father's voice was the voice of a man who had written and rewritten a sentence for 2 months and was now discovering that even the most rehearsed words feel entirely different when you are finally saying them to the actual person. I want to apologize, his father said, for what I said, for what I did not say, for not calling. a pause that had the texture of a man genuinely struggling with the distance between what he felt and what he was equipped to express. I have been watching. I want you to know that. I have been watching everything you are doing and Another pause. I am sorry, son. Taesung sat at his desk and looked at the city through the window. He said nothing. I would like you to come to dinner, his father said, whenever you are ready. I will think about it, Taesung said. He ended the call. He sat with the silence of the office for a while. Then he called Peggy and told her everything. The apology, the silence between the sentences, what it meant for a man like his father to be the one who broke first. Go, she said. I want you to come with me. Taesung, the contract is, I know what the contract is. I am not asking because of the contract. A long pause. He waded through it. Okay, she said, but before they could arrange anything, Peggy found out. It was a Sunday morning. She stood at her bathroom counter and stared at a test she had taken 3 times because she did not trust one result. 3 tests, same answer every time. She sat on the edge of the bathtub. She pressed her hand flat against her own chest to confirm her heart was still functioning. She was pregnant. She was furious, not at him, at herself, at her own carelessness, at the universe and its extraordinary, terrible sense of timing. She went through every possible version of what this meant, whether he would feel trapped, whether a contract that was already technically over now had a complication attached to it that neither of them had signed up for. Whether she was just another version of every woman who had put him in an impossible position. She got up, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, said nothing to anyone. She was still saying nothing to anyone 3 weeks later when they flew to Seoul. The Ryu family home was exactly as he had described it. A house built to communicate legacy without appearing to try. The kind of house that had been in a family long enough to stop being architecture and simply become atmosphere. Peggy walked through the entrance beside Taesung and held herself with the ease of a woman who had grown up in her own kind of inheritance and was not here to be impressed, simply to observe. His mother came out first. She walked directly to her son and took his face in both her hands and held it there, not speaking, just looking at him, the way a mother looks at a child she has been missing while pretending she was not. And Taesung stood still and let her look. Then the household arrived all at once. Siblings, cousins, an aunt who grabbed him by both cheeks before he could speak, an uncle who slapped him on the back hard enough that he moved forward 2 inches and recovered without comment. The noise of a family that had missed someone for 3 years and was not going to waste the reunion on restraint filled every room in the house. Peggy stood slightly to one side and watched all of it. She watched Taesung move through his family, the way he relaxed into it, the way his face became something different in that house, younger and less guarded, laughing genuinely, switching between Korean and a warmth that needed no translation. She watched and felt something she would not look at directly, the way you do not look directly at things that are too bright. His mother appeared at her shoulder. "Come," she said simply, and steered her gently toward the kitchen. 40 minutes later, they emerged from that kitchen with something established between them that needed no ceremony. His mother caught Taesung's eye across the sitting room and gave him a look that said simply, "Do not ruin this." He looked back at her. She looked away. After the family gathering settled into a quieter rhythm and the house began to breathe again, Taesung's father appeared beside him and tilted his head toward the study. No words, just the look of a man who had something to say that required a closed door. Taesung followed him in. Peggy was in the sitting room with his mother when the study door closed. She did not ask what was being discussed. She sat and listened to his mother talk about him. Small stories, early ones, the kind a mother keeps like photographs. And she held every one of them carefully, the way you hold things that belong to someone you have realized you love. Inside the study, Ryu Jung-hyun sat across from his son at a desk that had 40 years of decisions built into it. "The family business is still yours," his father said. "It has been yours since the day you were born. That has not changed regardless of what I said or did not say." Taesung looked at his father carefully. "I want to build my own first," he said. "I want to know, with certainty, with my own hands from my own decisions, that I am capable of it. I want something that belongs entirely to me. Because if this family ever turns its back on me again and freezes everything, I need to already be standing." His father absorbed this without moving. The clock on the wall marked the silence. "I understand," his father said finally. And it will be there whenever you are ready. All of it. Taesung nodded once. His father looked at him for a long moment. You made the right choice, he said, with the woman you brought. Taesung looked at his father. It is not what you think. His father looked back at him with the patience of a man who has had 30 more years than his son to learn what he is looking at. Then continue to deceive yourselves, he said. Taesung said nothing. He looked at his father for a moment, at the man who had shut a door on him 3 years ago and was now sitting across a desk telling him he could see clearly what his own son could not yet admit. He stood, straightened his jacket. Good night, father, he said. His father nodded once. He closed the study door quietly behind him. They flew home the next morning, back to their separate lives, which had become so tangled with each other that separate was no longer accurate, but neither of them had found the language for what it actually was. He was in his office on a Thursday afternoon when his assistant knocked. There is a woman at reception. She says she knows you personally. Name? Choi Yuna. He closed his eyes briefly, then, send her in. She walked in, and she was not the woman who had handed him divorce papers with her chin raised. The pregnancy was full and heavy now, and she was carrying something else alongside it. The specific exhaustion of a person who has understood their own mistakes so completely that there is nowhere left to put the understanding. She looked at his office, the real one, the one with his name on the door. And something moved across her face. She sat down. She talked. She told him she had made a mistake. She told him she had not understood what she had. She told him the things people tell the person they gave away when they have finally, too late, counted the cost. And then she slid from the chair to the floor before he could register what was happening. Both her hands wrapped around the hem of his jacket, her voice breaking, saying his name the way she had not said it in the last 2 years of their marriage. He stood above her and felt nothing. Not the nothing of someone who has shut feeling down. The nothing of someone who is genuinely moved, who has gone so thoroughly in another direction that this, the floor, the hands, the voice, lands not as a wound or a triumph but simply as the remnant of something that used to matter and no longer does. The office door opened. Peggy stood in the doorway. She took in the scene, Yuna on the floor, Taesung standing above her, the particular arrangement of the room, and stepped back. I will come back, she said. Peggy. He moved immediately, not toward Yuna, toward the door. She was already in the hallway, already walking, and when he came through the door, she turned with her face arranged in the composed and professional expression she wore like armor and said, It looked like an important conversation. I will come back later when... Peggy. You are finished. It is fine. It is not what you think. She looked at him. What do you think I think, Taesung? The hallway was quiet. From inside the office, Yuna made no sound. He stood in front of her and looked at her, at the composure, at the armor, at the practiced steadiness of a woman who had spent her whole life making sure nobody saw the cost of anything. And he was finished. He was completely, thoroughly finished with saying less than the truth. I think you think I still have feelings for her, he said. I need you to know that I do not. I have not for a very long time, because every feeling that used to live in that direction relocated the day I understood what it means to actually be with someone, not to perform a marriage, to actually be in one. She was very still. I know how I got here, he said. I know what I came from and what I lost and how I looked when I arrived at your door with one suitcase and nothing else. I know that this started as a contract, and I know that I am standing in the office you funded with a business I built on a loan you gave me. He did not look away from her. I know all of it, and I need you to know that none of it is what I see when I look at you. Her breathing had changed. I fell in love with you, he said. I do not know the exact moment. I know it was somewhere between the dining table and the first time you told me a hard truth about myself without softening it, and I sat with it and realized that nobody had ever trusted me enough to do that before. He paused. I fell in love with you the day you told me that a husband and wife are supposed to help each other, that they are supposed to support each other, that marriage is not one person carrying everything while the other person takes. His voice was quieter now. Because in 3 years of marriage, I had never once heard those words. I had been the one doing the carrying and the begging and the adjusting and the staying, and you said it like it was obvious, like it was simply what two people do. He stopped. That day, I understood the difference between what I had and what I had never known to want. She looked at him. I do not know if any of this has been real for you, he said. I do not know if I am standing here about to be the most embarrassing person in this corridor. But I will not, stand here and choose silence again. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I am pregnant. The hallway held absolutely still. That is what I came to tell you, she said. Her voice was level, careful. I have been trying to find the right way to say it for 3 weeks. Without another word, his arms went around her and he held her the way a man holds something he thought he was going to lose. Tae-sung, I know. You are suffocating me. I know. He did not move. A moment passed, then her hands, slowly, the way someone makes a decision they understand is permanent, came up and held him back. They stood in that hallway for a long time. Then they went back into the office. Yuna was standing. She had gathered herself into whatever was left of her dignity and was standing by the window looking at the city. Tae-sung looked at her. I am going to ask you to leave now, he said, quietly, without cruelty. I mean that with respect and without unkindness, but my answer is no. What we had is done, Yuna. It was done long before you handed me those papers. I have made my peace with that, and I am asking you to make yours. Yuna looked at Peggy. Peggy looked back at her, directly, steadily, without judgment and without triumph. Just waited. Yuna left. They went to dinner that evening and sat across from each other in a restaurant that knew them by now and brought their usual order without being asked. And they talked. The real kind. The kind where both people are entirely present and entirely themselves. About what they wanted, what they were afraid of, what the next years could look like if they chose them deliberately instead of falling into them sideways. They talked about the baby, and at one point they both looked at each other and laughed. The involuntary kind that comes out when two people are confronted with the sheer, extraordinary absurdity of how they got to where they are. So, Tae-sung said. So, Peggy said, we are doing this. We are doing this. 4 days later, Yuna appeared at Peggy's office building. She got past the front desk on the strength of a name she had overheard in Tae-sung's office and the confidence of a woman who was running out of alternative plans. She moved down the corridor with the energy of someone who has written and revised a speech in their head for several days and is now committed to delivering it. She pushed open the conference room door. 20 people sat around a long table. 2 screens were running presentations. Tam Tam was mid-sentence with a laser pointer. Peggy sat at the head of the table in reading glasses with a document open in front of her, and she looked up over the glasses at the door with the expression of a person who has learned to absorb surprises without showing the absorption. Every face at the table turned toward the door. The laser pointer went off. Yuna stood in the doorway. Nobody spoke. Peggy looked at her over the reading glasses for a full 5 seconds. Then she looked back at her document. Continue, she said to the room. Yuna backed out of the doorway and pulled it closed. She stood in the corridor breathing. Then she walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and when the door slid shut around her, she stared at her own reflection in the polished steel and stayed very still with nowhere left to go. After the meeting, Peggy was moving through the corridor when she heard her name. Yuna was at the window at the far end of the hall. She had waited, which was either brave or desperate, and Peggy had not yet decided which. She stopped. I just want to say, Yuna began, and her voice had lost its sharpness somewhere between the conference room and this window, that you stole him. You were lonely. You had no one, and you used the situation to take what wasn't yours. Peggy looked at her evenly. He is not a property, Yuna. He cannot be stolen. He was my husband. He was, Peggy said, and you knew his value. You simply did not know it in the language it needed to be known in until you watched him build himself back with his own hands from nothing. And now you understand what you had. She paused. That is not my problem, and it is not something you can reverse by standing in my corridor. Yuna's jaw tightened. Every marriage has problems. You should not have involved yourself. Is the child you are carrying his child? Peggy asked. Yuna went completely still. What happened to the father? Peggy said. Where is he now? The silence that came out of Yuna had a texture to it, the silence of a person who has been stripped of their last argument. Peggy turned toward her office. Security. 2 officers appeared from the end of the corridor. If this woman comes anywhere near these premises again, Peggy said, you are both looking for new employment. They moved toward Yuna, and then Yuna gasped, sharp, real. the involuntary kind that overrides everything. She grabbed the wall with both hands. Her face changed completely. The officers stopped. Peggy turned. She looked at Una, the hands on the wall, the face, the unmistakable nature of what was happening. She stood there for 1 second, just one. Then, "Someone call an ambulance right now, get a chair." She was in that hospital for 4 hours. She did not have to stay. There was no clause in any contract, signed or unsigned, that required Peggy Frank to sit in a maternity ward waiting room for a woman who had just spent the afternoon accusing her in a corridor. She stayed because she was the kind of woman who stays. A nurse appeared and told her. A girl, she walked in. Una was in the bed. The baby was in her arms, small and pink and entirely indifferent to everything that had preceded her arrival into the world. Una's face was stripped of every practiced expression. What was left was just a woman and a child, and the specific grief of a person who had expected to go through this with someone and had arrived at it completely alone. The baby's father had not come. He was a married man who had told Una, across months of late nights and promises, that he would leave his wife. And when the moment had arrived, when Una had stood in front of him and his wife in a room that made it finally real, he had looked at her and said he did not know her name. Una looked up and saw Peggy in the doorway. They looked at each other across that room and everything that had passed between them. The conference room, the corridor, the accusations, the whole wretched history of it, was still there but sat differently now, in the presence of a baby and a woman crying without any performance left in her. Peggy walked in and sat in the chair beside the bed. She did not offer comfort. She did not offer commentary. She did not say a single word about any of it. She just sat. Una cried, Peggy sat. Outside, the hospital did what hospitals do, and the city did what the city does, and time moved the way it does when it is not paying attention to anyone's grief. After a long time, Una wiped her face. She looked at the baby. She looked at Peggy. "Take care of him," she said quietly. "He is a good man. I did not know what I—" She stopped. "He is a good man. Take care of him." "I know," Peggy said. She left the hospital an hour later, stepping into the cool of the evening, and she stood outside the entrance for a moment and just breathed. Then she texted Tae-sung, "I'll tell you everything when I get home." He was in the kitchen. He had made dinner with his own hands, not ordered, not organized through staff, made it. He was plating it when she came in, and he looked up and put the plate down and waited. She sat at the table. She told him everything. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "How is she?" he asked. "She will be fine," Peggy said. "The baby is healthy." He nodded slowly. Then he brought the plates to the table and sat across from her, and they ate. They married again, not for a will, not for a clause, not with compensation terms and exit strategies waiting at the other end. They married in a ceremony that Tae-sung's mother cried through from the opening word to the last, that Tam Tam organized with the efficiency of a woman who takes joy in precision, and that filled a room with people who had watched two broken individuals find each other in the wreckage and slowly, stubbornly build something real. Peggy's father's photograph sat on a small table near the entrance in a gold frame. Before the ceremony began, she stood in front of it alone. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody rushed her. Tae-sung stood at the far end of the room and watched her and stayed where he was. 7 months after the wedding, Peggy gave birth to a boy. He came into the world loud and without apology, which Tae-sung said was entirely his mother's personality, and Peggy said was entirely his father's stubbornness. Tae-sung held him, carefully, the way a man holds something he cannot believe is real. And Peggy sat beside him watching his face as he looked at their son for the very first time. He did not speak for a long time. Then he looked at her. She was already looking at him. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. Una relocated back to Seoul. She sent Peggy a message every few weeks, small updates, a photograph of a growing girl with curious eyes. Peggy always replied. The replies were short and without warmth that was not real, and without coldness that would have been easy. Just a person, keeping a door open that she had decided, in a hospital room, in a moment that nobody asked her for, should not be completely closed. Tae-sung found out about the messages one evening. He sat with it. He looked at his wife, who was already looking back at him with the expression of a woman prepared to explain and defend her choice. He said nothing for a moment, then, "Thank you." She looked at him. For being who you are, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at her laptop. Stop being sentimental and come and look at this report. He came and looked at the report. Outside, the city moved through its evening with its usual magnificent indifference, and down the hall, their child slept in a room that had been filled with more love per square foot than most buildings ever hold, and the empire Franklin Osei spent his life building was in the hands of someone who had always known what to do with it. And Ryu Tai-sung, the man who had walked away from a dynasty with a pregnancy test in his pocket and arrived at a bar counter with nothing left to lose, was sitting exactly where he was always supposed to be. Some contracts cannot be canceled. Some people are not mistakes. Some terrible nights are the beginning of everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications, because there is always another story right here waiting for you.